All right, back for more. We're going to do the second section. This will be the second of the 3 in the chapter. Okay, here we go. We're going to be talking today about body symmetry, which we've hit on in the first section, body segmentation in animals, body support in both vertebrates and invertebrates. We're going to be comparing invertebrates and vertebrates on lots of different categories today. The second objective is to state the differences between the respiratory and circulatory system found in both vertebrates and invertebrates. We're then going to be comparing digestive, excretory, and nervous systems of invertebrates and vertebrates. So, get your pens and pencils ready, get your paper out. We're going to be taking a few notes. I know you're pretty excited as we cover the second section. Last but not least, we're going to be comparing and contrasting the reproduction and development in invertebrates and vertebrates. We know that all animals reproduce sexually. We know that it involves egg and sperm, but some animals reproduce externally and some internally, so we're going to find out about that. All right, part 1 here, comparing invertebrates and vertebrates. We know that invertebrates are animals lacking backbones, and we know that invertebrates make up anywhere between 95 and 97% of all animal species on Earth. We're going to be comparing them first with symmetry. Now, yesterday we spoke of 4 different types of symmetry. The simplest, which was no symmetry at all, called asymmetry. And then we talked about the round or global symmetry called spherical. And then we talked about a type of symmetry where several different planes can divide the animal in half, assuming you're cutting along the longitudinal axis, called radial. And then the most complex type of symmetry was bilateral. We're going to find out that invertebrates can exhibit all 4 types of symmetry. Invertebrates can be no symmetry at all, like the sponge, can be spherical, like the sea urchin, can be radial, like the jellyfish, or can even be bilateral, such as the earthworm. But, did you know that their type of symmetry actually is related to their body? For example, radial symmetry in jellyfish. Radial symmetry in jellyfish allows the animal to receive stimuli in all directions while drifting. Remember yesterday I said that a jellyfish looks kind of like an umbrella with this rounded type of body at the top and then these tentacles that come down. Jellyfish don't have eyes. They can't see their prey or predators. They can only sense and sting when something swims into the tentacles and gets tangled up within the tentacles, and then of course the tentacles trigger the stinging cells to shoot out like barbs into the prey and will then kill it, paralyze it, and then the tentacles act like fingers, if you will, and bring the prey in for digestion. Well, radial symmetry is great for this type of existence for the jellyfish. Bilateral symmetry that's common also in invertebrates is good. It allows cephalization. Now remember from yesterday the word cephalization. Cephalo means head. Cephalization means a concentration of sensory organs here in the anterior end of the animal. It's an adaptation for a mobile lifestyle. You're on the move, mobile lifestyle. But invertebrates can have all 4 types of symmetry, but vertebrates can only have 1 type of symmetry. That's right, you guessed it, bilateral symmetry. Let's compare invertebrates and vertebrates on segmentation. Segmentation means a body divided into units. When I think about earthworms, I think of bodies divided into hundreds of little sections called metameric units. You know, when I was younger, I had this idea, this notion, if you will, that I could take an earthworm, cut it in half, and make 2 worms out of 1. I was a genius. I was going to have the earth overrun by earthworms. I knew they were good for the garden. They aerated the soil. They allowed, water to be able to penetrate down to the roots of the plant, enabling the plant to grow bigger, better, faster, stronger. And we know that earthworms, of course, recycle nutrients back into the earth. So I was going to go on this big quest to make a bunch of earthworms by cutting 1 in half to make 2. What I didn't seem to realize was that I was actually killing the worm, and the reason that both halves were still moving was just simply due to nerves. When you look at an earthworm, you see that an earthworm is cephalized. It has a concentration of sensory at the head end, and really the only thing extending through the end of the worm to its anus is something called its intestines. There are no sensory organs at this end. And by cutting the worm in half, not only was I dividing the anterior from the posterior, but I killed the worm. But segmentation is a body composed of repeating linked units. In invertebrates, you have insects that have 3 body sections. You probably studied those in grade school where you had the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Or maybe you were studying spiders and they had 2 body sections called a cephalothorax and an abdomen. But invertebrates such as insects found in phylum Arthropoda, arthro meaning joint, arthropoda are your jointed feet animals, they have 3 body sections: the head, where you've got sensory organs and antenna, you've got, and mouth. You've got the thorax having, wings and legs, and then you have an abdomen, which is like the tail and the posterior of the animal. Maybe it has a stinger, I don't know. Maybe it has an ovipositor like a grasshopper, I don't know. But here's an example of how invertebrates can be segmented. Earthworms found in phylum Annelida. The word Annelida literally means little rings, and that's kind of like, the body of the earthworm is in little rings. We find that annelids have hundreds of sections, and each one contracts and expands against the other one and helps the animal to move. Vertebrates also have body sections, and that's evident in the fact that we have these ribs, of course forming a rib cage protecting our vital organs, and we also have a backbone in units, vertebrates. Now I just have a craving for country ribs. Here's a diagram of the body sections of an insect where you have the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Here's the spider having the fused head and thorax called cephalothorax, cephalo head, thorax, thorax. And then of course the abdomen, 3 body sections, here you go, and the 2 body sections. And here's a picture of the earthworm, and we have hundreds of what's called metameric units, hundreds of metameric units. You can tell on the earthworm the anterior from the posterior. The anterior is bigger and juicier and fatter because you have a concentration of sensory organs here, as well as other organs like the crop and the gizzard and so on and so forth. Earthworms have this banding around them called the clitellum. When we get to the chapter on earthworms, we'll talk about how this clitellum is involved in reproductive purposes. But for today, you can see all the little sections, all the little metameric units, hundreds of them. Support of body. Invertebrates and vertebrates use 2 different things for the support of the body. Did you know that roundworms, they use their pseudocoelom for body support? When I say roundworms, I think of heartworms. And then I start thinking of like when you go to the vet and you see the big poster on the wall of the heartworms, and it literally looks like spaghetti noodles all intertwined and entangling within the heart and, crushes the heart so the heart can't pump blood, and then of course the dog dies. Happy St. Patty's. Invertebrates, like a sponge, will be using stuff called soft tissue for body support and structure. Invertebrates such as roundworms use their fluid-filled body cavity. I call it the pseudocoelom. And insects use their exoskeleton. What's an exoskeleton? Well, that's a skeleton on the outside of the body. If you've ever stomped or stepped on an insect and you heard a crunch, the crunch was caused by the hard exoskeleton on the outside of the animal. That exoskeleton provides a couple of things for the insect. It provides like muscle attachment for the insect. It helps keep the animal waterproof as well. The exoskeleton is a hardened covering made of a material called chitin. You've heard that word before. It's a hardened covering providing protection, a place for muscles to attach, also helping to make the insect waterproof. However, not only insects, like crayfish, lobsters, they have exoskeletons. The exoskeleton not only does these functions for the animal, but it also limits the size that the animal can grow. The animal has to shed its exoskeleton to get larger. And maybe you've seen those little carapaces on the tree from the locust that has, attached to the tree. The dorsal side has split open, and the animal has, fallen to the ground with its wet wings. It can't fly until the wings dry out. But that exoskeleton has limited its size, so it had to shed, and it's called molting. And I don't know if you've seen that episode of SpongeBob where Mr. Krabs is going to go to the marine reunion, and he starts to molt, and then he doesn't want anyone to see him, so SpongeBob gets in his shell and acts like him. If you haven't seen it, it's a very interesting episode. But, anywho. Vertebrates, for support of a vertebrate body, you can say that a vertebrate uses its bones, its endoskeleton. We have internal skeletons, and that does support a large, heavy body on land. Of course, the largest animals on Earth are actually found in the ocean. The water, even though they have the internal skeleton, the water also helps with their buoyancy as well. So how do animals respire? And by respire, I mean, taking in oxygen and giving off carbon dioxide. Well, vertebrates and invertebrates can do it in different ways. For example, sponges just pretty much rely on water to bring them oxygen and carry off carbon dioxide. But some, like the earthworm, which is an invertebrate, they respire directly through their skin. They breathe in oxygen and they give off carbon dioxide across their skin. Therefore, their skin must be kept moist. Now, speaking of that, you've seen those kamikaze earthworms in the summertime that, crawl out onto the sidewalk, and then they burn and fry and turn crispy critters on the sidewalk as they become trapped. That's because they can no longer breathe. They die out there in the hot, blazing sun. Vertebrates like me, you, cats, dogs, ligers, fish, birds, whatever, we're going to use either gills or lungs. And that's right, I said it, you heard it. Humans had gills at one time. We'll talk more about that when we talk about pharyngeal pouches. I know you've heard that term before. Circulatory system. Why do you need a circulatory system? Do all animals have hearts? Do all animals have aortas? Do all animals have veins and capillaries? And no. Circulatory systems, their job is to transport oxygen and nutrients, and blah, 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 and remove waste from cells and carry it away, and blah, 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 blah. But not animals do it in the same way. Sponges, they don't have a system. I know, like sponges are so simple. Sponges don't have a system, and some animals don't have a system. The nutrients and gases exchange right across their skin. They don't have a system. Sponges, jellyfish, sea anemones, they don't even have a system. Some animals, invertebrate animals, have what's called an open circulatory system. Now here's where it gets good. Do you remember last year in physical science when you talked about electricity and you talked about open circuits versus closed circuits? When you flip the light switch on and the lights come on, you have what's called a closed path of electricity. Electricity is flowing in a closed path and the light is on. When you flip the switch off, the system opens. Electricity doesn't form a closed path and the light goes off. Well, it's a lot like a circulatory system. In an open circulatory system, blood just kind of flows, maybe within a few vessels, but blood flows throughout the animal in maybe just a blood-filled sac. But in animals like humans and ligers and cats, dogs, birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles, we have a closed system where blood is in our body and it's completely contained within vessels. Invertebrate animals might have an open system, which means blood is just kind of passing through maybe in a hemocell, hemo meaning blood, cell from body cavity. Like spiders, arthropods, and even some mollusks have an open circulatory system. It's not going to be as efficient because it can't keep deoxygenated blood separate from oxygenated blood. So it's not really efficient to have this type of system. Therefore, these animals wear out easily. They don't have as much energy as others. Some invertebrates have closed circulatory system where blood is completely contained within vessels. Earthworms, for example. Earthworms are pretty interesting. They have a dorsal blood vessel running along their top They have a ventral blood vessel running along their body, and then attaching the two are five pair of things called aortic arches. Now, we all know what an arch is, and we know that the word aorta refers to heart. So it's kind of like earthworms have 5 hearts, but not hearts like ours with, you know, the atria at the top and the 2 ventricles at the bottom. But they have 5 arches, linking their dorsal blood vessel with the ventral blood vessel. Vertebrates. Now, when I say vertebrates, I'm talking about all your amphibians, your fish, your reptiles, your birds, and your mammals. When I talk about those 5 vertebrates, I'm talking about the only type of circulatory system they can have is called a closed circulatory system, where blood is pumped with a multi-chambered heart, and it is completely contained within vessels. Now, when I say multi-chambered heart, humans have 4 chambers, but amphibians actually only have 3. Humans have 2 atria at the top, 2 ventricle at the bottom, just like cats and dogs and ligers and tigers. But amphibians have 3 chambers. They have 2 aorta at the top, and then at the bottom is a ventricle. So what ends up happening is the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood actually end up kind of mixing a bit. Not as effective and efficient as a 4-chambered heart, but a 3-chambered heart's better than no heart at all. Digestive and excretory. Why do you need a digestive tract? Because you need to break down nutrients. Because remember, you are a heterotroph. In a digestive system, invertebrates have to have what's called a gut. A gut is a structure that breaks down food into usable molecules. Oh, a gut. Some invertebrates digest food using individual cells. Again, sponge, so simple. We're going to talk about these things called amoebocytes and collar cells. Collar cells are the cells, they're called collar cells literally because they look like I have a collar on them. But these collar cells have a flagella, and the flagella helps to draw the food in with the water. The collar cells draw in the nutrients, the food, if you will, in the water. They break it down into usable molecules. They pass it to the cells called amoebocytes. Amoebocytes, well, they kind of change shape as they move through all the cells within a sponge, and the amoebocytes are going to deliver those nutrients to the specific cells needing them. We'll get onto that when we get to the chapter on sponges. Some animals, like the cnidarian, like the hydra, the jellyfish, the sea anemone, actually have a digestive tract with 1 opening. That's right, I said it, you heard it, 1 opening. So food goes in that opening, and then the undigested stuff comes out of the same opening. Its poop hole and mouth hole are the same. Aren't you glad we're not a hydra, a jellyfish, or a sea anemone? Just saying. There are some invertebrates that do have specialized structures to help filter the ammonia into a less toxic substance. Now, these are still invertebrates, mind you. Earthworms can do this. They have special structures called nephridia. The prefix neph means kidney. Nephridia act like kidneys for the earthworm. Vertebrates have a very well-developed gut. They have a mouth connected to an anus. Now, we've spoken about this before. Your digestive tract is like a straw. It's just a tube. We're all just tubes, right? When you eat the Big Mac, it goes in here, down the esophagus, into the stomach, through the intestines, and then, you know, whatever can't be digested goes out to the anus. It doesn't go down your right leg to your left arm or something crazy like that. Nutrients do, but the food doesn't. The food stays within the gut and is digested. Many vertebrates also have kidneys. I have 2, you have 2. They're located pretty much right here in your back. They filter the liquid waste. They deal with that harmful, toxic ammonia. Nervous system. Do invertebrates have a nervous system? Well, they do. But sponges, sponges don't have one. You guessed it. Sponges, they don't have neurons. Neurons, that's the word for a special nerve cell. Sponges don't have neurons. They do have some cells that react to stimuli, but they don't have neurons. Stinging-celled animals like, you know, your jellyfish, they do have neurons, loosely connected neurons, but they can't see, but they can feel. And these neurons are loosely connected. Mollusks. Now mollusk, the word mollusk comes from the word mollusca, which means soft body. This is everything from the octopus, the cuttlefish, the squid, even the clams and oysters of it all. These things do have well-developed nervous systems. And I don't know if we were ever talking about octopuses, they are even capable of decision-making behavior. Ooh. I've seen videos, and I know you have too, and maybe you can check out some YouTube videos. I've seen scientists place, if you will, an octopus in a peanut butter jar, screw the lid on, and the octopus is able to unscrew the lid and get out of the jar. Amazing! I have an irrational fear of octopuses, like, Vertebrates have highly organized brains and muscle control. Even that stupid dog that my mom owns, that stupid fat black dog, has a brain. Pea brain as it is, she still has a brain. Highly organized brains with muscle control. Reproduction and development. Well, we all know that animals are sexual because they produce both egg and sperm, and it's the union of the egg and sperm, the union of those gametes that produces offspring. Well, invertebrates are capable of sexual reproduction, obviously because they're animals, but some are even capable of asexual reproduction. Let's talk about the sponge. Did you know that you could actually pinch off a piece of a living sea sponge, and that living piece of sea sponge will then continue growing into a sponge? Oh, I guess I'm getting some TikTok messages. And the bigger sponge that you pinched off from will regrow what it's missing. Of course, it doesn't have to look exactly like what you pinched off because remember, sponges are asymmetrical. Starfish, they can regrow missing body parts, can't they? Through something called mitosis, division of the cell nucleus. There's a word that comes up when you talk about simple invertebrates, and the word is hermaphrodite. Learn it now. Hermaphrodite is defined as an organism that produces both egg and sperm. However, take note, however, even though they produce both egg and sperm, they very rarely self-fertilize. That's interesting. Because if you could self-fertilize, you'd be making copies of your own on your own. Copies of you on your own. Now, tapeworms, they can actually do it. But other animals that are hermaphroditic, they're unable to. And mainly because they produce egg and sperm at different times of the year. Oh, makes sense. In invertebrates, you've got direct development where the young is born in the form of an adult. For example, grasshoppers. Grasshoppers are born as little bitty, teeny, tiny baby grasshoppers. They're so doggone cute. Then they just grow into bigger grasshoppers. Or if you've seen that YouTube video, the woman with the tarantula egg sac, have you seen this? If you haven't, it's gross. It will give you nightmares. Don't watch it if you get nightmares easily. But they open up the egg sac and they see all these hundreds of baby tarantulas. They're born in the form of the adult, just a teenier, tinier version. That's called direct development. Now, some invertebrates have indirect development, such as flies. When flies are born, they're born in this little worm-looking thing called a maggot, and then the maggot, of course, goes through the stages of development indirectly with egg, larva, pupa, adult. Or maybe you're even talking about butterflies. You know, they're born not in a butterfly form. They form the chrysalis. They come out of the chrysalis, and they're these beautiful butterflies. Or moths do the same thing, but they're a cocoon, so whatever. But that's called indirect development. Vertebrates, however, they have fertilization that can be either external or internal. You know, a lot of fish and amphibians have external fertilization, and you've probably seen like spawning beds in ponds maybe, where the female lays her eggs, and the eggs have like a sticky capsule holding the eggs all together in like a big mass. And then the male comes by, and he emits the sperm over the egg, and that fertilizes the egg, and that's called external fertilization. A lot of fish and amphibians do this, but not all. And then, or fertilization can be internal. So how do body coverings differ? Well, we're going to talk about body coverings in vertebrates. For example, The integuments of fish and most amphibians. An integument is a body covering, an outer covering. The integuments of most amphibians and fish are adapted to live in their moist environment. Can you imagine a fish living in water taking on so much water that it exploded? Well, es no bueno. That wouldn't be a good thing. So its integument actually keeps it from bursting. Food for thought. Well, it also serves as a respiratory organ, meaning some organisms breathe through their skin. They exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide with their environment, and they can even use it as protection. Spines, quills, pretty cool stuff. The integuments of terrestrial animals are adapted to hold water inside the body. Oh, I can't tell you how happy I am to be retaining water, especially right now. I'm just kidding. Our integuments can also serve as an insulator. So, you know, it goes back to that whole thing where you have a 300-pound person and a 100-pound person. They've been sitting inside the air conditioning for an hour, let's say. Both go outside at the same time together. It's 95 degrees outside. Which one sweats first? Well, a lot of you are going to think the heavier person, the one with more body fat, if you will. But think about this. Wouldn't the one with more body fat have more insulation, so the thinner one would sweat first? Yeah, I hardly ever sweat. That's a lie. So, on to section 3.